Today it's my pleasure to welcome Luke Jensen to the Brain Forest Cafe. Luke served in the Marine Corps for 6 years and 2 years in the National Guard, deploying to Afghanistan with an airborne infantry unit. After his deployment, he faced severe PTSD, a loss of purpose, and a transformative dark night of the soul. Seeking healing, Luke explored various modalities, eventually traveling to the Amazon basin in Peru to experience ayahuasca. This profound encounter brought him personal healing and a spiritual awakening, revealing the vast interconnected nature of the universe. Inspired by this experience, Luke delved into shamanism, including rediscovering lost Northern European traditions. Along his spiritual journey, he encountered neurofeedback and QEEG brain mapping, quantitative electroencephalography brain mapping, and recognized their transformative potential for healing and spiritual growth, what he calls spiritual neuroscience or electronic yoga. These tools became central to his evolving vision. In 2019, Luke met Dr. Richard Soutar, whose mentorship profoundly deepened his understanding of consciousness, healing, and the neurological foundations of spiritual development. Since September 2023, Luke has been leading retreats in Peru's Sacred Valley, combining diverse healing modalities into a unique and transformative experience. He has also conducted groundbreaking research using QEEG brain mapping to study plant medicines, including the first longitudinal study on ayahuasca and the first brain imaging study of Wachuma. Through these studies and future research, Luke hopes to deepen humanity's understanding of plant medicines, consciousness, and spirituality. His work aims to inspire a greater recognition of our spiritual nature and the boundless potential for personal and collective transformation. Luke, it's my pleasure to invite you to the Brain Forest Cafe.
Hey, Dennis, thanks for having me on.
And there you are. We see you in Louisa's place in the Sacred Valley. So thank you so much for making time. We can just get right into it, I guess. So you've had quite an evolutionary journey stemming from your own personal situation, and now you're studying. Uh, you're bringing neuroscience and traditional medicine together, looking at these sacred medicines, particularly Wachuma and ayahuasca. Uh, so tell me a bit about your work and where that's led you.
Yeah, Dennis. Yeah, thanks again for having me on. It has been a journey. I was in the Marine Corps, then I joined the National Guard. I was put to Afghanistan, and after I got back, I went and tried ayahuasca and was a part of soul searching, looking for my path. And at the same time, around the same time, I had my first brain map done to me, a QEEG brain map. And after that brain map, they showed me I had a brain pattern for PTSD or anxiety, and it was very empowering for me at the time because I realized that I could work on it and train it through what they call neurofeedback. So, just sent me on a course of reading tons of books and realized that not only is plant medicine very spiritual, but there's an application with the neuroscience, and that's what we were, and that's what I started studying, because everything's really a brain pattern. So meditation's a brain pattern, shamanic states are a certain brain pattern, and I started looking to this field more and more, and I was called to this part of the process of human potential, I would say. So yeah, I've been living in Peru for the last 4 years. My first time here was 10 years ago. I've been back and forth for a long time, but permanently for 4 years. And I've been using the neurofeedback, brain training, QG brain mapping, and then working with plant medicines too. And also, like you said, the research has been really important to gain insight in what these plant medicines are doing, how they help heal the brain, help heal trauma, and help us reach different levels of consciousness.
Right. So how did you study neuroscience after your deployment, after you left the military? Did you go to school to acquire these skills, or did you acquire them on your own?
Well, for the first 5 years, I just read every book I could find on it. And then I showed up to the International Conference for Neurofeedback. And I was just a person with an idea. Most of them were like PhDs or researchers or medical doctors. Um, and my idea was combine the two. And I met my mentor, Dr. Richard Soutar, and he said, I told him like, hey, my idea is combine ayahuasca and plant medicines with QEEG brain mapping. He goes, I've been waiting to meet someone like you. I'll train you. So he's one of the top people in the field of neurofeedback. I'm so honored and blessed to have met him. It's been a life-changing journey. And I've been working with him every week. We do a meeting every week for the last 5 years. So
Yeah, yeah.
I have a lot of experience now understanding brainwaves. That's that.
Okay, so he got it. He could see the merits of bringing these technologies together. Has he been to Peru to participate with you in any of these events, or is he a long
No, he
mentor?
he has he has not been here. I would love him to come down. I'm kind of like a field researcher in some ways because he goes, "Hey, Luke, everyone that does this stuff, they're in clinics. They don't have the time or availability to go in Peru and start brain mapping people." So, um, but I would say he's very interested in Zen Buddhism. He has a lot of experience with meditation, decades of that, and he also is very familiar with shamanism. So he himself has been involved in these fields, even though he hasn't been directly to Peru.
Okay, but he is familiar with these altered states from plant medicines. Is that
Y
right?
yes, he was involved in this he's in his 70s now, so he's involved in the '60s and LSD, and he was part of that maybe first wave of psychedelics in the '60s, and he was heavily involved in that period.
Okay, well, it sounds like he's the perfect mentor for you. You're very, very lucky to have found him, you know? So uh, I looked at the two papers that you published, one on Wachuma and the other one on ayahuasca, and it seems that both of these plant medicines show a unique profile, not at all what was expected, and each one is unique, and the findings, the response are different from each other. So ayahuasca and Wachuma are both plant medicine, but they cannot be equated to each other. They are somewhat different, at least in terms of the brain mapping response. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's very interesting what we're seeing in plant medicine. So the brain seems to heal in different ways they're needed. I think one thing we saw with ayahuasca that I think that was interesting that needs further research is that it helps with focus and ADD. We had one person come in with the classic brain pattern for ADD, and they had self-reported symptoms of ADD, and that pattern was gone completely, and so were the self-reported symptoms after 3 ceremonies. So I think it's one issue that people haven't really looked at that that this can help with focus with ayahuasca. I think there's general trends where they both heal as needed in the brain, so they both help regulate the brain in a healthy way. I don't think that's too discussed yet in the field. I think most people look at like the networks and network connections and how those are changing. But if we look at it over time, we're seeing those differences and changes over time. Like what does that person where is their brain dysregulated and how does it become more regulated, more healthy? And we're seeing that wherever they need to be regulated at, that's where we help that. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, to a degree. So it seems that the application of QEEG and these other neurofeedback techniques can be used to kind of uh, track the changes that are reflective of a therapeutic response, sort of the reestablishment of equilibrium or systems that are out of equilibrium. Whereas the acute measurements after the session or looking at neural connectivity and those sorts of things, they don't give you a picture through time because, as we often say, the real work begins on the plane home from the ceremonies, right? I mean, people come out of these ceremonies, and it's not like they're fixed. They are actually at the beginning of a long process of healing. And presumably the brain changes that take place in that post ceremony space, that's in effect where the real healing takes place. And would you agree with that?
Right. I think one of the biggest things we see with plant medicines, it increases neuroplasticity, allows the brain to change. So when you
Right.
allow the brain to change, it creates novel solutions. And that period of change lasts past that ceremony. It lasts when they get home. So this is a really critical period for people to take up a new habit, whether it's yoga, qigong, meditation, or something to help them keep on that path, a spiritual path, and keep that change moving forward. That's really beautiful the beauty of plant medicines.
You don't have to keep taking plant medicines, or you would not necessarily not take them, but the changes that are taking place, which you now have the ability to track using these technologies, would that can that be used, in effect to structure this therapeutic, protocol? I mean, you can you follow these patterns and say, well, it's time to go back to the well. It's time to return to the medicine to get further healing, or is it because I assume it's not a one-time thing. It's not that you take these medicines and suddenly everything is fine. It is a process.
Yeah, I think what we're doing now will give lots of insight to that. I think this is still the beginning stages of exploratory research to find out, how long these plant medicines last for each people. I think questionnaire studies are very hopeful, and I think that the brain mapping is very important. So the what we do with QEEGs from the neurofeedback field, we can track affect, like psychological states. So we can see depression, we can see anxiety, we can see markers for this. So we can see those things lifting. And that's the really powerful thing with what we're doing. And then we can also see where they'll be challenged in the future. So the really neat thing about neurofeedback is, or the brain mapping is I could see like, okay, this person has these patterns and this would be a good meditation for them when they get home. This would be a good, maybe microdosing might be good for that certain brain pattern. So the idea is to kind of coach them what would be good for them when they get home and help the integration process. And then, yeah, like we could actually track and see maybe what plant medicines might be good for people too. Maybe different ones have different effects. We're still at a very early stage in that kind of research. Some might be good for addiction, some might be good for PTSD. We're still figuring all that out.
Right, right. So it seems that this ability to measure actually lets you track this process as the changes take place. And it's remarkable that these two plant medicines, the Wachuma and the ayahuasca, are both psychedelics, but they seem to work in a different way in terms of the way that they enable a sort of relief from these symptoms. I mean, it's remarkable that the neurofeedback and the brain mapping lets you see the pathology as it develops through time, but also lets you see the resolution of the pathology as your healing progresses.
Yeah, I think you're touching on like probably the most important point, if not the most important point, because we can see how trauma is stored in the system. And I think this will become very important down the road for science because there's a famous book called The Body Keeps the Score, and the body holds trauma in itself, but the brain holds trauma. The brain compartmentalizes trauma different ways. So, for example, when we look at a QEEG brain map, I can see a brain that's too busy, overworking. That's how it's holding trauma. Some people might contain trauma by worry or disassociation or daydreaming. And these are brain patterns that hold that trauma in so that person doesn't feel that. So as that trauma is released, they start feeling more and those patterns change. So this is on one hand, give us new insight into trauma and how it works, how it's stored in the brain. And you're right, how it's released. I think it's very powerful and very, very interesting. I think in the future, this will be very important to understand the process of healing, and this is why plant medicines or spiritual practices or that kind of soul work is healing at a deep level, which is different than possibly like a pharmaceutical drug. And I think that's what we're seeing a difference in.
What about conventional psychotherapeutic approaches to trauma and PTSD and this sort of thing? Do you see what did I mean people who have experienced these things, there's a reason that they seek treatment outside the conventional frameworks is because the conventional frameworks don't work often or they're not effective. So people are led to seek treatment with psychedelics, for instance, and that sort of thing. Do you think that in a conventional therapeutic uh, a treatment protocol with or without psychedelics, you'd seen similar changes going on? Or I guess the question I'm getting at is how important is the ceremonial context to this, the shamanic aspect of this? Because this is not something that's brought into the clinic very often.
Yeah, no, I think it's very important. The shamanic aspect is very important. With this, with the brain mapping, yeah, you could track traditional therapies. And the reason I went into ayahuasca the first time is 'cause I wasn't too confident in the results. I think also to understand brain function and how this works. So the reason that psychedelics are so powerful because it literally opens up different networks. It allows people to think in novel ways and novel solutions. So traditional therapy, if you look at like Freud or those early on people, you lay on the couch and then they'd often go into these hypnagogic states because that's where the brain can access trauma and heal itself. I'm
Well,
not sure if that still goes on the same way, but there's those deep states we need access. So whether it's through psychedelics or shamanic drumming or things like this, we need to keep the brain and brain function in mind and how trauma is released. So I think that's really important.
yeah. What what differences are you seeing between Wachuma and ayahuasca that in terms of the response? What stands out for you about the differences in these two plant medicines and based on that the what would be the most appropriate way to approach the use of each one? Are they complementary? Are they I mean, should you use both of them? Not in combination, of course, but as part of a therapeutic treatment protocol, or are you better off sticking with one and experiencing over time what it can do?
Well, I think now we get into the subjective realm of plant medicines. So we can see certain things with brain mapping, but um, the subjective experience is unique to each person. So in some ways, people might be called to Wachuma, or some ways people might be called to ayahuasca. In our retreats, we do 3 ayahuasca ceremonies, and then at the end of a retreat, we do Wachuma ceremony, kind of tie everything together. And that ceremony is a hike where people experience nature, whereas ayahuasca is for that often that deep soul work, the deep going to the unconscious. Um, so I think a lot of times it becomes different for each person, but I don't think the research is in yet to know the major differences and what it can do. We're at the very early stages of this. And I think also we're still at the early stages of tracking it long term. Those studies do not exist yet with brain mapping. So no one's tracked out 3 months or 6 months after a ceremony and what what changes are still there, what changes revert. We don't know that. So I think we're still at the early stages of that. I'm really hopeful to see what that would look like, but I don't think we know completely yet.
Right. So you need to you need to effectively follow this throughout the whole process. How do your the people that come to your retreats um I guess they know what they're in for. I mean, I'm wondering how do they feel about being wired up to machines while they're having these profound spiritual experiences? Are most people receptive to that, or you spring that on them when they show up? They say, "Well, you have to put this thing on your head and take this thing." I suppose most
Well,
people are probably receptive to the idea once they are convinced.
it's very interesting. So we don't actually use it during ceremony, during the retreats. We do a pre-map before the retreat, and a map
Okay.
after the retreat, and we track time. So we don't really want to mess with the sacred space unless we're doing like a specific research project, and that we often have volunteers for that. Um,
Okay. You can take some, you can do brain mapping prior to the sessions and then follow up with several sessions measuring the changes over time in the in the brain map, right? To track the progress.
so in our retreats, we do 9 days. When they first arrive, we do a brain map. The day before we leave, we do a brain map. So in that short period of time, first brain map, second brain map, there's a big change for people in that period of time. And it the neuroplasticity dramatically increases. And with this tracking change over time, we can see markers for depression go down, anxiety, and like I said, even focus can improve. Head trauma, we've seen really powerful improvements with that. So in a short period of time, we can see, a large change in neuroplasticity and how the brain's working, which is really cool.
So it seems this is a very, these are very useful tools to kind of correlate, I guess you could say, or an objective measurement of what's going on in the brain, coupled with people's subjective experiences, that they are actually resolving some of these issues that they're there to deal with.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important because the Western mind's often very skeptical. I was very skeptical when I arrived in Peru and did plant medicines, and my when I first did it was like, was this just in my head? Was it a hallucination? Did something really happen? And for a lot of people, we can show their brains changing, and we can show that neuroplasticity. We can show them, how they look differently. Their brain looks differently. That can be very validating to a lot of people, and
Absolutely.
that's really cool part of the process. So.
Yeah, that's very convincing. I mean, we like objective measurements and we like gadgets, you know, we like some way to objectively represent this, right? So you,
Yeah.
I looked at some of your videos for the retreats, those short videos. You don't do only plant medicines. You do a kind of a holistic approach where people do like physical exercises, drumming, other types of exercises and practices. Do you use the brain mapping to during those or how does all that fit in? It's not uh it's not, well, maybe it is common, you know more about what the practices are down there, but usually, my own experience with ayahuasca retreats, very limited experience with Wachuma, uh, but usually, you know, there's not wrestling involved, there's not, you know, physical things. How does that fit into your therapeutic approach?
Yeah, so the first retreat I did in Peru 10 years ago was an adventure tour style retreat. So we went out, we saw the country, and we were on a canoe every day in the Amazon, and it was really I really appreciated that. I didn't want to like necessarily sit at a retreat center. I wanted to go out and have that adventure. That was my personality. And I thought of it as a model for many years after that. And basically we've included things that have changed our lives in our retreat. So the ayahuasca has been very powerful. Wachuma has been powerful, but the brain mapping and neurofeedback is very powerful. So we put that in our retreat. We have acupuncture in our retreat, and we have jujitsu. And I started jujitsu a couple years ago, and it's so powerful and so healing. It's a martial art, and it tests you every day. It forces you to, test your limits and know who you are. And it's been very beautiful. I really appreciate that. And some people are a little apprehensive about the jujitsu, like going to a plant medicine retreat. But wherever anyone's skill set is at, we work with them. And they learn a couple moves. And if they want to go back and learn more or start that sport, they can. The idea is to bring all these different things in that have helped us and also to help ground people. So we have adventure hiking. We take people out into the mountains to meet these communities that are really, really high up in the Andes that you never ever meet. And they live in stone houses. So you actually get to see the country and appreciate the world that we live in. And I think all those things are important. So oftentimes with ayahuasca, you have these ideas, epiphanies, but it's important to bring to earth and ground them. And that's what we're doing with a lot of what we do with the martial arts, with the hiking. All these things come together to help ground and bring those lessons, bring those lessons back.
That makes sense, and give you a better, appreciation for the cultures that you're in and how they view the world. And, because, uh, most people's daily experience, they're not on ayahuasca, they're not on Wachuma. These are special occasions, and, the rest of the time, they are in whatever we choose to call ordinary waking consciousness, which of course is not ordinary at all. Very fact that we're conscious at all is kind of a miracle.
Right.
And, but I can see how, certainly in my own experience with psychedelics, I can, it does give you an appreciation for nature and the connectedness of everything, and it's that's a very important thing. I mean, I think that is a sort of, revelation that people come back with, and if nothing else, they come back with a renewed, appreciation of their connectedness and the importance of our place in nature, and the the context, the traditional context in which these plant medicines are utilized, because it is kind of alien to our Western worldview, this whole context. But if you can come into this and then with a tool like the QEEG, you can relate that to something that Westerners are, uh, rightly or wrongly, like that objective measurement. They like some external validation, I guess you could say, thinking maybe
Yeah.
their own internal affirmation of what's happening to them is not enough. Well, it is enough, but it's good to have confirmation from an independent source. I think it's very valuable to be able to do this.
Yeah, no, there's so many things there, but I think experiencing the culture is so important. Uh, you know, we these plants, these medicines are from these cultures, right? And so to go out and experience them and see how they live, I think that's so powerful. And it reminds us of in the Western world of all the gifts we have and the abundance that we have to appreciate that. So I'm really happy with, our how we interact with the local community, but also, like you said, nature. Nature is so powerful. After a week of ayahuasca ceremonies, you come out into these wide expanses in the mountains, and it's just you feel differently. You feel connected differently. That's really important. And with the brain mapping, the QEEGs, I think, yeah, the experience is enough and it's beautiful. And it's also interesting to put some science to it and see what we see, and it can be really powerful for people that are those skeptics, and a lot of people are skeptics and don't want to be skeptics, but this is kind of how we're built. We're just built that way in Western society. So to help that skeptical mind and help them take that leap and to go, hey, this is validation behind it. And my hope is to build these databases up enough by working with retreats that maybe we'll have 1,000 brain maps one day of pre and post
Yeah,
and just have that evidence there. And from my point of view, a lot of these retreats say we change the world one person at a time. That's true. But what if we have the research? What if we have the data? And then we show that, that's really how you can like make another impact in a larger way and have other people look at the plant medicines that might not have before.
right, right. No, it's good to build up, a data bank of results, particularly in something like this, where it's so hard to keep a handle on it, because you're dealing with people's subjective experiences, and those are not easily stuffed into some, I guess you could say, conceptual box. The model fits more or less, but the electroencephalographic measurements provide that external, uh, bar that you can compare it against. So do you keep in touch with people that come to the ceremonies and follow their progress weeks or months or years after they get this treatment? Do you have a database of these people that you're in touch with?
Well, right now we just have the pre-map and post-map of our retreats. No one's done the longer term brain mapping. I definitely want to do that study and do that research. We just have to figure out how to do it because most people come to Peru, they stay for a retreat and they leave. So we're going to find out some way where they can do a brain map back in the United States or wherever they're at after they come back. So I have some ideas so far, people I want to work with in the States, but that's still a project that needs to be developed further.
Right. Is this something that could be done using remote? I mean, could people, on Zoom, for instance, put on the apparatus and you could make the measurements and you wouldn't necessarily have to be in the room or be in the clinic with these people to gather this kind of data?
Actually, that's a really good point. I never really thought about doing that. It's a really good point. So technically, yeah, we can mail them a unit. They could put it on, and then you know, we coach them through the mapping process. It's not too difficult. Originally, I was thinking about partnering with maybe possibly different clinics that have the technology in the states, potentially like Oregon or Washington, where people might be coming down more often, and then tracking them as they get back. But that's a really good idea too, is to maybe mail them something and track them, as they integrate. So
Yeah, I would think you'd be able to find some clinics that would to be interested in that. For example, clinics that are providing like ketamine therapy and that sort of thing. I mean, this would be just I mean, it just not that you would measure ketamine, but that, they sort of have the the facilities and the mindset that you have to track this process through time, and they might well have these kinds of setups. So that's one possible way to approach it.
yeah, that's a good point. That makes a lot of sense.
Have you extended this to other psychedelics? Have you have
The
you
brain mapping.
have you tried, yeah, the brain mapping? Have you tried it with other things like LSD or DMT or things like that? Or I guess you have to stick with natural medicines, but anything to say comparatively about these other medicines?
So far, mushrooms. We've done a little bit with that, and microdosing. Done a little bit with that. And I think we want to do more with DMT, peyote. There's definitely more work we want to do. We have some future planned studies. Actually, did coca leaves. We're brain mapping that right now. I don't think anyone's actually ever QEEG'd and or studied coca leaves yet, or something we're working on right now. Um, Basically, we're in the Sacred Valley of Peru, so the big things would be ayahuasca, Wachuma, coca leaves, sometimes mushrooms. That's what we're working with now, but possibly we might travel for other projects too. So
Right, right. So you anticipate just keeping on and doing this more and doing more retreats. So is that the plan for now? And accumulate as much data as you can and publish. I see both of these papers have been published and they will get noticed, presumably, when they're published.
yeah, so especially the Wachuma paper, because no one's ever brain imaged that. There's so little research on it. When people look it up, that comes up pretty quick. Other people have told me, which is really neat. I'm really glad to be part of that process. So I think, yeah, the one we're gonna keep running retreats because it's the beauty of what we do. We love running retreats. I have an amazing team, and I love running retreats, and it's such a beautiful part of that process. And then, yeah, we have the want to keep pushing the research. That's gonna be really important. That's a lifelong mission goal as well. I think both those things are really important. So, yeah, that's what we're doing, and that's what we're called to do, and it's a really beautiful process. So,
Okay. Very good. How much of this work have you done with mushrooms? What are you seeing with mushrooms that stands out for you? Are they similar to Wachuma and ayahuasca, or what's different about them or unique, if anything?
Well, I think mushrooms, it's really beginning research, but I think it would help calm the brain. And I think microdosing can help people with what we call power level issues, like the mitochondrial function or ATP production might be down in that certain brain system. So I think microdosing mushrooms can be really powerful for that group, and I will look at that more because that's a big pattern that we run into in the neurofeedback community. When a lot of times when people have head trauma or severe emotional trauma over time, the resources of the brain aren't as activated as they should be. The mitochondria aren't working where they should be. So we need to find ways to increase the energy levels in the brain and bring it back up to like a healthy level. I think mushrooms can really help out with that. I think we're just looking to that research. Another thing I forgot to mention, my friend does a retreat with tobacco, and that actually had a really powerful effect. I was kind of surprised because it's not like a classic psychedelic, but they did a dieta with tobacco, and I saw a change with that too. So we're seeing lots of things, and we're just, yeah, in
That's
many ways
very
we're just starting.
interesting. Tell me about that. What would you see about with tobacco? Was it similar to the psychedelics, or
Well, I
what?
think a lot of these things they seem to help move the brain in a positive direction. And actually, it was Luis, our filmmaker that you know very well. It was him I tracked with tobacco dieta, and some people they have different brain patterns, but we can see like a busy mind calm down. That's what I saw with the tobacco dieta. So it was in dieta. They're also in isolation. So this is exploratory research. This isn't like a clinic where we have like one, you know, set alkaloid that we're studying. We're studying the wholeness of the approach, like you said, the shamanism as well. But we did definitely notice that the system was more calm after tobacco.
Right. Well, it's very interesting work that you're doing, and you're a pioneer. You're on the frontiers of something. the
Thank you.
the confluence of neuroscience and shamanism. That's we always sort of anticipated that it would come to that, and you're making it real. I think there's always, as you mentioned, there's a lot of skepticism, but skepticism cannot stand up in the face of evidence. And that's the virtue of science, is it tries to approach everything with a skeptical mindset. That's the idea of the scientific approach. And then you seek data, and you're finding, you're putting actual data, and that is answering the skepticism. It's showing, people can talk uh, subjectively about their experiences a lot, but every experience is unique. And that what I think these measurement tools give you is an objective experience that's harder to knock down, to the skeptics, and it's actually evidence. Do you think, I mean, something that stood out for me in reading both of those papers that I didn't read all of them in detail. I read basically the introductions and the conclusions, but it seems that both of these plant medicines, Wachuma and ayahuasca, are rebalancers. They reestablish this equilibrium, and but they do it in a different way. Each one seems to focus on or direct healing to particular deficiencies, and they have the outcome is similar, but the mechanism is somewhat different. Or is that a misinterpretation of what's going on here?
No, I think we're looking at outcomes that are similar because as we remove trauma from the system goes towards equilibrium. So this is a really interesting finding because this can help everybody, basically.
Mhm.
I mean, as long as they're not schizophrenic or those other things, they're not ready for the medicine, but looking for healing, this can really help them in a profound way. And that's what we're seeing. And as far as the mechanisms go, that's kind of like a different area of the science that other people are going to have to look into, because
Right.
we're looking at the brain waves. It's probably something about the chemistry that's still being dealt with, right? All the alkaloids in Wachuma, because Wachuma has mescaline, but probably has like, I think it's 40 other alkaloids in it as well.
Right.
So this will be a science that will be explored for a long time out to find out what exactly is going on. But you're right, the outcomes look very similar, because each way that the person's finding healing and their nervous system is finding healing. So this is why when people come out, like, they feel more relaxed, they feel less on edge, but also their cognitive function increases, which I find very interesting. So we think about this, we think of depression lifting, we think anxiety lifting, we think about how the brain works. The emotional brain is the core of the brain. The cortex, those upper structures are on top of it, the cognitive structures. So you heal the emotional brain, their cognitive abilities will increase. Their memory might get better. Their focus might get better. All these things improve when the emotional brain's healed, and everyone has some level of emotional trauma. So when you heal that, it allows for the whole system to work more effectively.
That's interesting. So yeah, it works on all levels, and I'm kind of not surprised that it also improves cognitive functions, you know. I mean, if the brain works better, you know, basically it makes the brain run better, and that's going to affect cognitive functions as well as the emotional traumatic functions. And so I think you're doing great work here. You're developing some tools that are going to be very useful going forward for this research. And then the whole area that perhaps you're going to explore, or you know, you have these tools so you can apply them to plant medicines, but then you can apply them to other modalities such as sound immersion and that sort of thing, maybe in combination with plant medicines. It'd be interesting to see what results come out from that kind of treatment.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things we want to do is, you mentioned these different modalities in a retreat. We were interested in sound healing and yoga and how these other things work, right? We want to bring everything to bear for people's healing, especially with people with PTSD or war veterans. And we don't want to limit it to one thing. We want to, like, hey, what works? And with the brain mapping, we can figure that out. So that's been really cool. And we actually have done some studies with sound healing. We do notice a difference in the brain maps.
Oh yeah. And what are you finding there?
Um, Yeah, we see the system relax, something similar. So we notice the modern brain, the modern person is over aroused. It's very common to have over arousal. So what we've seen is that over arousal relax and their system relax with some sound healing.
Hmm.
That's been really cool.
Not not so surprising. Well, I think with all the concerns about, you know, there's a great deal of concern about the mental health of veterans, you know, and that seems to be an opening. And there's perhaps more concern and more talk about it than there is actual support. But that might be an opening. That might be a way to get formal support for this kind of work. I mean, if you have ambitions to do that, you know, and then ultimately you have to kind of to do bigger studies. It takes more funding, it takes institutional affiliations of some kind, but I think these are powerful tools, and the publications that I looked at and that you're continuing to come out, hopefully this will get noticed and you'll be able to seek support if that's the direction you want to go.
Yeah, Dennis, I think you're right. I think that the veterans are very important. I think everyone deals with trauma, but in the culture, people talk about veterans a lot and they're looking for solutions. And I think that the VA system has let veterans down in many ways. So people are looking for alternatives. Veterans are looking for alternatives. Veterans are forming their own communities to seek alternatives. And I think you're right. This might be a way for the public to, maybe look at this differently, and maybe funding as well, like you said. I think in the end, we are going to need these bigger studies, these bigger projects. And right now it's very preliminary. I think there's a lot more we can do.
Right, right. And unfortunately, in this particular political climate now, the government, at least in the States, is busy dismantling science as much as possible. And so it's always been a challenge to get funding for this kind of thing. And now it's even more difficult. But on the other hand, the US is not the only country where this kind of research is going on. So it might be possible to get funding, maybe even from Peru. There might be organizations in Peru that could support this because, unlike the states, Peru recognizes ayahuasca at least as kind of a national treasure, and many clinicians in Peru are familiar with it. They recognize its value. Peru doesn't have a lot of funding for research, but they might be able to, uh, they might be interested in supporting this. And then there's quite a bit of ayahuasca research going on in Brazil as well. So, uh, you know, but I think you just keep on doing what you're doing and keep publishing and making sure people know about the work you're doing. You never know when somebody will come along and say, "This is cool. I want to support this." And that's the way it progresses. That's the way science goes. So thank you for sharing all this with me. It's a very interesting project you're working on.
Yeah, Dennis, thanks for having me on. And part of that outreach is being podcasts like yours. So I really appreciate that because you never know who might be hear this or who might be interested in this. The study that we're doing and what we're seeing with plant medicines is allowing us to see trauma in a different way. We're seeing how trauma is stored in the system, like we talked about, and we're seeing how trauma is released from the system. So
Right.
that alone is very, very powerful. I think that this could really change the way we view healing and view medicine. So I'm really excited about the future. I'm super happy what we're doing and where I'm at. And thank you for having me on. It's been super interesting talking to you.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I think you're developing new paradigms that are going to be usable for the decades to come. I mean, we need tools like you're using to really sort of bring some structure to the development of psychedelic-based therapies, and that's what's happening. It's gotta be more than just people go to a session, they feel, relieved, and then what, So these provide
Right.
mean to actually kind of put that process into context and ultimately facilitate better healing. So thanks so much for talking to me, and we'll get this up here real soon. Is there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to be sure we did, or
Well, yeah, just what you said that last part, Dennis. I think you're right that we bring science to bear not just on psychedelic healing, but consciousness itself. We've explored the
exactly.
universe, we explored the micro realm of the atom, but consciousness is such a mystery. And the psychedelics are giving us insights into this, and plant medicines are. And now we have this brain mapping. I really think the 21st century can be that um, the new frontier is human consciousness. And I think to bring all the tools to bear upon it is very important.
Consciousness is the big enchilada. Consciousness is the big mystery of neuroscience, and hopefully all these tools and intelligent use of psychedelics and other medicines and these sorts of things will bring us closer to understanding what consciousness is. We all experience it, but nobody knows what it really is. So you're putting pieces in place. Making the you're putting the puzzle together, and that's really valuable work, Luke. So I wish you all the best. Keep us posted, and we'll continue to track what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. Just one last thing. If people are interested in my studies, they can go to neuroenlightenment.com and Tiwaz Awakening, like the rune, the warrior rune, TIWAZ Awakening is our retreats too. So thank you so much.
Good work, Luke. Keep it
Yeah.
up, and we'll be talking.